get worried about recording things in the cloud. But anyway, my name's Amira Nelson. It's nice to see everybody today at today's information session. I am the Senior Outreach Officer for the Fulbright Specialist Program, and I'm based in Washington, D.C. at World Learning, which is a global nonprofit that serves as the administrating partner for the Fulbright Specialist Program. Just before we begin, I'm just going to start with a few housekeeping notes. Today's presentation, as you heard, is being recorded, so we'll be sure to share that around with everybody after today's session, just in case you need to leave early or want to have access to that afterwards. And lastly, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to pop those into the chat box. I will try to address questions as I can throughout the presentation, if it makes sense for the flow of the presentation, since we do have a pretty intimate group today. But if not, we will definitely have plenty of time at the end for Q&A. Just to give you a little bit of an overview to know what to expect today, today's presentation is going to cover specifically the Fulbright Specialist Program, which is a part of the larger Fulbright program. So we'll talk briefly about the Fulbright program and then dive right into the Specialist Program, including what are the overall goals and focus of this particular component of Fulbright, what are the grant benefits for participating specialists, as well as eligible disciplines and host institutions. And I'm then going to provide you with a few examples of what we see as kind of common project activities so that you can start to get an idea of what you might be doing if you are a Fulbright specialist. At that point, we'll take a little bit of a deeper dive into the weeds of the program structure and the application process, as well as eligibility criteria. If you've seen our program website or spoken with an alum, you may have found, or you might have learned that the specialist program has a rather unique roster-based structure. So rather than applying to an award and proposing your own grant activities that you would then specifically carry out if you were to receive an award, this is a host-driven component of the Fulbright program. So it's host institutions that propose the projects, and on the US side of things, applicants apply to join a roster which makes them eligible to be matched to those different projects designed by those overseas institutions. So we'll talk a little bit more about what does that roster-based structure look like? How do I get matched to a project? Before I turn things over to our wonderful program alumni, who are going to be giving you some insight into their experiences as Fulbright specialists themselves. And then, of course, we'll open things up to questions. Before diving in, I just wanted to give a shout out to our amazing alumni that we have here, who have, some of them are here today, some of them have contributed some slides and feedback about their experiences that I'm going to help share. We have Dr. Joy Burnham here joining us. She is a professor of counselor education and the director of the Office of International Programs in the College of Education. And she was a Fulbright specialist to China in 2012. Additionally, Dr. Norma Cuellar has contributed some slides about her experience. I'll help her go through that. She's a professor in the Capstone College of Nursing, and she recently served as a specialist in 2019 to Peru in the public and global health discipline. And lastly, we have Dr. Pamela Payne Foster, who is a professor of community medicine and population health within the College of Community Health and Health Sciences. And she did her Fulbright Specialist Award to Morocco in 2016 in the public and global health discipline as well. So taking a moment to just talk about the Fulbright program. Some of you may be very familiar with the Fulbright program or may in fact be alumni yourselves of the Fulbright program, but this is the flagship international educational exchange program sponsored by the US Department of State. And it's led binationally with different country governments around the world, but it's led by the US government in partnership with those country governments in more than 160 countries worldwide. And the Fulbright program's aim is to offer international educational and cultural exchange programs to people from all walks of life, whether that's students, scholars, teachers, artists, or professionals, to, depending on the particular component, do things like study, teach, or pursue important research and professional projects, both for individuals from the US to go overseas and do those things, but for people around the world to come to the US to do those things as well. Since 1946, the Fulbright program's mission has really been to foster mutual understanding between nations, share knowledge across communities, and improve lives around the world. We're actually celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Fulbright program this year, and some of the incredible impact that that program has made on the over 400,000 Fulbrighters around the world. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about Fulbright and about the Fulbright program's 75th anniversary, there's a whole website you can go to at fulbright75.org, so I encourage you to check that out. To dive more into the Fulbright Specialist Program, this particular component of Fulbright has been around for about 20 years now. It was established in 2001 for the purpose of providing institutions around the world with the opportunity to access American expertise and build relationships and collaborations with US professionals and faculty. World Learning, which is the organization I work for, serves as the program's implementing partner. So we partner with the Department of State to administer the program, including overseeing the application processes, matching processes, and actually supporting award recipients to embark on their exchanges around the world. To give you just a very brief summary of what this program is, it provides the opportunity for you as experienced faculty and professionals and administrators to embark on a 2 to 6 week long exchange at an institution in any one of 160 eligible countries. And that exchange is based around a specific project that has been designed by the host institution to meet their particular needs or knowledge gaps that they may have. Within the broader goals of the Fulbright program of advancing mutual understanding between the people of the United States and around the world, the goals of the Fulbright Specialist Program are very much host-driven. So the main aim is really to connect, again, those institutions with US expertise to advance their own institutional needs and goals. And that's done during these exchanges by facilitating the sharing of knowledge between the specialist and their host institution, and having the specialist work to build the capacity of the institution to continue working towards those objectives even after the exchange is over. Ultimately, the hope of all of this is that those connections are going to be strengthened and the specialist and their host institution will continue their relationship and continue their collaboration, whether in a formal or informal capacity. To give you some idea of the scope of this program, in a typical year, we would expect to administer a little bit over 400 projects per year, and these really do take place on a year-round basis. They're not necessarily constrained to a particular semester or academic term. Ultimately, the timing of the project is really up to the host institution in consultation with the individual that they select and the schedule that works for both of them. For you as prospective US specialists, it's important to know that this program is really intended to be fully funded for the US participant. Traditionally, that funding is provided from two different stakeholders. Firstly, the US Department of State will fund your travel to and from the host country, your round-trip international airfare, a transit allowance of $100, a daily honorarium of $200 per day for the duration of your grant activities, as well as any applicable visa fees and enrollment in a limited health benefits plan. Additionally, host institutions are investing, if you will, in hosting U.S. specialists, and they traditionally provide either funding or in-kind support for your lodging, meals, and your in-country transportation for the duration of your grant period. Now, because these are short-term awards, the host institution will make those arrangements for you in advance of your arrival. And those arrangements do vary depending on the host institution's capacity, as well as the larger country context. But some examples of lodging arrangements could include existing facilities for short-term visitors, for example, or more traditional sort of hotels or long-term apartment or guest house style stays. However, the Department of State does review all of these arrangements ahead of time when they are reviewing the host institution's proposal to ensure that these costs are indeed being covered for all participating specialists. So that honorarium is really intended as such. It's not intended to cover any of your costs while you are actually in the host country. There are 24 eligible disciplines that are supported by this program. Now, I've listed all of these here, and these are kind of the guiding disciplines that guide what projects are being proposed by host institutions, as well as, generally speaking, the professional backgrounds and expertise of the U.S. individuals that apply to this program. However, what I want you to understand is that within these 24 disciplines, there's a really wide range of project activities and focus areas that can be included within that, because for each of these different disciplines, there are a number of specializations or focus areas that are available within each of these disciplines. So for example, I often get questions about people with a background or expertise in the fine arts or the humanities. Those are not specific disciplines as you see here, but they are included as specializations within the American Studies field. Additionally, fields like psychology, nursing, dentistry are all included as specializations within the public and global health field. And higher education administration is a specialization available within education. So you can see, although there are 24 larger disciplines that are considered eligible for this program, there's really such a wide range of different activities and expertises that are represented within this program and supported by the program. Now, during the application process, you will need to select a specific discipline under which to apply, but you can also choose up to 5 specializations to help convey what your expertise is. Just keep in mind that when you do apply, you are asked to only select one discipline. So if there's anybody in the audience who has made a career pivot or maybe has a more interdisciplinary area of expertise, that's important to know, because ultimately you'll need to reflect and decide on which particular discipline you will be selecting. Ultimately, the discipline that you select is going to influence the general professional and academic backgrounds of the peer reviewers that are going to review your application. There are 5 categories of institutions that are eligible to host a specialist. These are institutions of higher education, government institutions, cultural institutions like museums or libraries, NGOs, as well as medical institutions. So you really have a wide range of potential options here for institutions that you could be working with and making an impact at. Similarly, the range of activities that you could conduct as a specialist is quite wide and very diverse, because ultimately these activities are going to be driven by the needs of the host institution itself. One thing that is common across all project activities is that because the focus of this particular program is on sharing knowledge with and building the capacity of the host institution, the activities themselves focus on concrete education, training, or capacity building work that can be completed during that shorter 2 to 6 week time frame that we're talking about for these exchanges. So this program really focuses on, again, activities that have an education, training, or capacity building component. So for that reason, the program actually does not support US scholars to go overseas to conduct their own research abroad. I've collected several examples here of what we would consider kind of common activities that we see repeatedly requested by host institutions. Now, this isn't exhaustive by any means, but hopefully it gives you some idea of what we're talking about when we say kind of this umbrella term, education, training, and capacity building activities. That could be things like delivering seminars, consulting on faculty or workforce development, developing curricula or materials the institution is going to use after you return home, giving lectures, conducting needs assessments, in some cases supporting or consulting on preparation for accreditation, and engaging in strategic planning activities as well. What is quite common, even though the activities supported are very diverse, is that you would be asked to kind of deliver a couple of these activities during your time as a specialist. So it's not typical that we would see somebody just go overseas, deliver lectures for 2 weeks, and that's it. Oftentimes, institutions are very interested in having you conduct a range of activities to really leverage your expertise across their entire institution or organization. So for example, you might be spending quite a bit of your time delivering a workshop on a particular topic, but then in between those workshops, you might be pulled into meetings with faculty groups or graduate student groups. You may be asked to give a larger lecture that's more public facing about a particular topic. And you can kind of expect in general to be serving as almost a short-term consultant to the institution in a variety of their different needs and questions. So it's important as a Fulbright specialist, as I think with any Fulbright experience, to really make sure that you are flexible and adaptable to the needs of your host institution. Now that I've given you kind of an overview of what is the program, what are the general activities and parameters for this program, I'd like to take just a deeper dive into the program structure and application process. As I mentioned briefly earlier, one thing that is quite, maybe not unique, but quite unusual about this program is that it does operate using this roster-based structure. So when you go online and you apply to the Fulbright Specialist Program, what you're actually doing is applying to join a roster of pre-vetted individuals who are then the pool that is eligible to be matched to different projects and ultimately serve as Fulbright Specialists. Now, the program uses this structure because since applications are designed and the applications for projects are designed and driven by host institutions themselves, on a global scale, you really enable host institutions to submit projects on a rolling basis throughout the year. So having this kind of previously vetted pool of individuals who have already been deemed to be not only highly qualified in their respective fields, but also having a high potential to really be of service to a host institution and of benefit to a host institution, and take those experiences and return them to their US institutions in some beneficial way, enables us to actually serve the needs of these host institutions much more efficiently than if we were to recruit for each specific project as it became available to the larger kind of wider pool of all faculty and professionals in the United States. The steps to join the Fulbright Specialist roster are pretty straightforward. First, you go online and you submit an online application to the Fulbright Specialist roster. Applications are accepted on a year-round basis, and peer review panels are convened about 6 times per year to review those applications. So once your application is complete, it will be evaluated based on the next available cycle by a peer review panel. And I'll talk a little bit later on about who is that peer review panel and what are they going to be reviewing. Once the application has been reviewed by that peer review panel, they'll issue a recommendation to either admit you or not admit you to the Fulbright Specialist roster. And those individuals that have been recommended for admission will receive a 3-year tenure on the Fulbright Specialist roster. And that 3-year period is the period during which you'll be able to not only review available projects as they become available throughout your 3-year tenure and kind of put yourself forward for consideration, but also the time period during which institutions can actually also request you specifically to serve as the Fulbright Specialist for their project. And I'll talk a little bit more about those methods just a couple slides on. Before we do all that, I do want to cover key criteria for admission to the roster. So there's several different eligibility criteria. In the interest of time, I'm not going to cover all of them exhaustively today, but I do want to point out a few key ones. The two main criteria are that you must be a US citizen. Permanent residents are not eligible, unfortunately, and you must be able to have significant demonstrated experience in your respective field. Because this program is open to both professionals and academics, there are actually no specific terminal degree requirements for admission to the roster. So depending on your own personal and professional trajectory, you can choose to demonstrate this through a combination of professional, academic, or in some cases, artistic achievements. Additionally, if there's anyone in the audience who is an alumni of another Fulbright program or is thinking about applying for another Fulbright program in the future, I want you to know that there are no conflicts between applying to the Fulbright Specialist roster and applying to these other programs. So alumni of other Fulbright programs are eligible to apply, and there's no waiting period to do so. Similarly, if you are admitted to the Fulbright Specialist roster, that does not impact your ability to apply to another Fulbright program opportunity. Additionally, you are able to apply to the roster and join the roster multiple times throughout your life. There is a waiting period for those individuals. If you've previously been admitted to the Fulbright Specialist roster, we just ask that you wait 24 months from the end of your last roster tenure before you reapply to join the roster again and potentially do another project. Similarly, the Department of State does implement waiting periods between actual Fulbright Specialist projects. There is a 24-month waiting period between projects as well. So if you were to do a project during your roster tenure, say, for example, the beginning of your roster tenure, you could potentially do a second project if you are able to meet that 24-month waiting period before your roster tenure expires. The application itself is fairly straightforward. I'm a little bit biased, but I would say it's fairly straightforward. Generally, what's required for this application is a few key components. Some kind of personal bio data. You'll fill out a short form that gives like your email and all that information. Information about your past education and your past and current employment. A resume or CV of up to 10 pages in length. 2 essays, and contact information for 3 professional references. Once you actually submit your component of the application, those references are going to receive a message directing them to an online reference form that they'll need to complete. I would say it shouldn't take them maybe more than 20 to 25 minutes for them to complete. It's really kind of a series of ranking questions and then 3 short answer questions. And then if you would like, there's a couple of optional sections here. 1, geographic preferences, which isn't so much used to evaluate your application. It's more so information that's used to support the matching process should you be admitted to the roster. And language skills. And similarly, this is not so much used in the actual evaluation of your application. It's more so information that we use to help support the matching process for those individuals who are admitted to the roster. In that case of the small minority of projects where institutions request or require that the selected specialist have some type of language capacity. Now, all of this is up on our website. There's actually a full list of key eligibility criteria. So if you are thinking about submitting an application, I definitely recommend checking that out, and I'll drop the link in the chat box once I wrap up my component of the presentation. That eligibility criteria is just something that I'd recommend everybody look at before they start their application, just in case you have questions about your specific situation. You can always reach out to us by email or by phone, and we're happy to get you sorted out with your questions in regards to eligibility or anything else. Now, in terms of probably the biggest component of your application is the essays. These are capped at 1,500 words each, and it's probably the area where we anecdotally hear from applicants that they spend the most time. The first essay asks that you describe why you're interested in serving as a Fulbright Specialist and how your participation would benefit a host institution abroad, as well as your institution or employer in the United States. Additionally, the prompt asks that you include specific examples of activities that you might be interested in leading or completing at your host institution abroad as part of your program. So there's a lot in this prompt, and I'd like to just spend a minute to break it down a little bit. Firstly, this essay prompt asks you to actually address a couple of things. And I find that many applicants are very ready to answer the components about why are you interested in serving as a Fulbright Specialist, and how do you think your participation would benefit an institution abroad. Some applicants, I do find it's easy to forget about that very last part of that sentence, as well as your institution or employer in the United States. Ultimately, being a competitive and a successful Fulbright Specialist applicant is not just about what you can bring to an institution abroad, but it's also about what you will do with that experience after you return to the United States. And so peer review panelists are looking at that closely. They like to see applicants who are motivated to, not just go on their exchange and certainly be of aid to an institution overseas, but someone who's not going to just say, well, that was a nice 2 to 6 week exchange. I'm going to go back to my life and just continue on. They are hoping for specialists to be able to use those experiences to do things like internationalize their coursework, contribute to internationalization or study abroad initiatives in their U.S. institution or among their U.S. community, and help build that mutual understanding. People who are going to be motivated to continue their collaborations with a host institution, whether informally or formally. So it's important as part of the prompt to make sure that you don't forget about that piece. The second thing I just want to address is the second part of this essay, the request for specific examples of activities that you might be interested in leading or completing at your host institution as part of your program. Now, in my capacity as the outreach officer, I get a lot of questions about this part of the essay. What do you mean by specific examples? How many examples should I include? How exhaustive does this need to be? Ultimately, this component of the prompt is not about having applicants articulate every possible activity that they think a host institution could be interested in. Because of the structure of the program, you'll have an opportunity to target your expressions of interest for specific projects at a later date once you actually know more about the host institution. So you don't have to worry about creating a long list of, like I said, every single possible activity that you could do, or kind of create a list that's going to be appealing to a prospective host institution. This component of the prompt is really more so about articulating to the peer reviewers what you feel are kind of like your best strengths, or what do you feel are the activities that you think would be most beneficial that you would be prepared to do at a prospective institution overseas. It's really more about, again, articulating that you've thought through, what is my expertise? How do I think this could be helpful? In what ways, in what structures do I think I could most benefit an institution overseas, keeping in mind that these are short-term impactful exchanges of 2 to 6 weeks. Essay number 2, I'll be a little bit quicker with this one. Just ask you to describe any previous experience working in an international environment and why you believe that you would be effective serving as a Fulbright specialist at a host institution abroad. Now, I do want to emphasize that this program does not require prior experience in an international setting. That is by no means an eligibility criteria, and we actually encourage people who haven't had those opportunities to apply to the program for that purpose. So as you can see here, if you don't have prior experience in an international setting, you can take the opportunity to describe what strategies you would employ in order to be successful as a Fulbright specialist, considering that you're going to be working in a cross-cultural context, and you're also going to be working within this broader Fulbright mission of advancing mutual understanding between the US and people around the world. As part of that response, you could certainly incorporate, I think, experiences that you've had working with international populations here in the United States or virtually. There's a lot of different opportunities there, even if you haven't necessarily had the physical experience of working overseas in an international setting, to bring those experiences into how you address this prompt. All right, so just a word about the application process. As I mentioned earlier, applications are accepted year-round, and peer review panels are convened 6 times per year to review all the applications that have been completed to date. So to just give you an example, our next deadline is January 12th, 2021. So everybody who has completed their application by that date, which means not just completing their portion, but making sure at least 2 of those 3 references they provided have completed the online reference form, that group is going to move forward for review, and will hear back from us on February 11th regarding whether or not they were recommended for admission to the roster. And ultimately, if recommended for admission to the roster, that group will have a 3-year roster tenure that begins on February 11th. As I mentioned earlier, those peer review panels are going to be comprised of individuals from the same general field as the applicant, and that is determined by the discipline and specializations that you select. So there'll be 3 individuals on your peer review panel, and they're going to assess kind of 3 broad categories. 1, your professional qualifications and accomplishments. 2, your cross-cultural skills and adaptability. And lastly, this category that we can call potential for overall benefit to stakeholders. So that's sort of a category that addresses what's the potential for you to benefit an institution overseas, but also, as we were talking about earlier, for your participation in the program to benefit US institutions or organizations or communities. Now, there is a full list of peer review panel criteria up on our website. And so I would say that's a great tool for anybody putting together an application, just to take a quick look at that peer review panel criteria and make sure that your application does address all of those points that the peer review panelists are going to be looking at. Now, once individuals are accepted to the roster, there are a few methods of matching individuals to projects, as I kind of alluded to earlier. And the reason for this is to meet the needs of a diverse variety of institutions around the world, both those that maybe don't have access to particular connections or relationships with faculty and professionals in the US, as well as those that are looking to strengthen some of those nascent relationships. So firstly, anybody who is admitted to the Fulbright Specialist roster can view and express their interest in available projects for the duration of their roster tenure. So for you, if you were to be admitted to the roster, when you log into the online portal next, you will see a list of available projects, and that list is going to be constantly updated throughout your 3-year roster tenure. You'll be able to see key information about the project. For example, when is the host institution looking for the project to take place? Is there any flexibility around that? what are the key activities they're looking for somebody to conduct, what are their larger objectives for the project, and are there any specific knowledge or skill areas or language requirements that the host institution would like for the specialist to meet. Based on that information, you can express your interest in the project in order to be considered by the host institution to serve as the specialist. And what that process looks like is simply submitting a short statement of interest. It's up to 300 words, a short explanation of your availability generally to complete the project, and uploading a resume or CV alongside your statement. So that's really the opportunity where you can get much more specific about how your specific skills or knowledge meets the needs of the host institution. You can target your resume or CV to highlight things that would be most relevant to that particular project or that particular host institution. Now, there's an internal deadline for everybody on the roster who's interested to express interest in a project. And once that deadline closes, World Learning will share the dossiers of all the qualified candidates to the host institution. And it's ultimately going to be the institution who will have the latitude to kind of review and select their top choice individual to work with. At that point, World Learning will facilitate contact between the host institution and the top choice candidate and give them an opportunity to discuss the project together. And so that's just a last opportunity to talk through timelines, expectations, existing capacity, any questions the candidate has for the host institution, and vice versa, so that both parties can determine that they are both going to move forward together. And at that point, we would, kind of continue the processes, the next steps of getting approval and, enabling you to receive your award and embark on your exchange. Additionally, institutions do have the option to specifically request individuals to serve as the specialist for their particular project. Most often, we see this is the case if they have a prior contact or affiliation with the candidate. Say, perhaps they visited University of Alabama at some point and interacted with that faculty or staff member, or that person had been to their host country or been to their institution. It can even be cases where a former student has returned to their institution in another country and is now a faculty member themselves, and they're looking to strengthen that relationship, or they received a recommendation to work with a specific person through their networks. In these cases, keep in mind that that selected individual still needs to meet all of the requirements that all other Fulbright specialists need to meet. Namely, they need to have been admitted to the Fulbright Specialist roster, and they need to meet all of those kind of waiting periods that I talked about earlier in order to actually do the project. So it's not necessarily a guarantee if you're named on a proposal that you will definitely do the project. You have to make sure that you meet those criteria still. But if this is the case, an institution has specifically nominated someone to serve as a specialist. If that project is selected by the local Fulbright Commission or embassy and it's approved by the Department of State, at that point, we reach out to that individual first and give them the option to essentially accept that nomination, because we want to honor the fact that the host institution has articulated a need to work with a specific individual. Now, once an individual on the roster has been matched to a project, World Learning staff will kind of start to play more of a day-to-day role in terms of interacting with that grantee. We'll have a program officer who's responsible for the program in that region, and she will be helping you with distributing and collecting program forms, arranging your international travel, dispersing your honorarium payments, and just generally serving as a source of support for your questions or any needs that you might have throughout your exchange, including making sure that you arrive safely, checking in to make sure that you've returned to the US safely, and conducting a mid-program call just to troubleshoot any questions or concerns that you might have and just check that your project is going smoothly. With that, I'm gonna kind of wrap up my kind of overview of how the program works, what are the parameters, and turn things over to our wonderful program alumni, because they're really going to be giving you some insight into what this all looks like actually when you are serving as a Fulbright specialist in another country, and also what are some of the kind of relationships and benefits that have actually resulted from their exchange experiences. So with that, I'm going to first turn things over to our alumni, Dr. Burnham. I think she's able to unmute herself, but I will just check on this. Okay, it looks like she is unmuted. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Dr. Burnham. Thank you.
Thank you. First, I want to say I'm honored to be here today. I had a wonderful experience as a Fulbright specialist, and I was hosted by Shenyang Normal University in China in 2012. I can't believe it's almost been 10 years ago. I put a map out there for those of you that like to look at maps, and you can see in red, I was northeast of Beijing. And I participated in the Fulbright Specialist Program to experience a very exciting but a short-term international collaboration. That was important to me because of family obligations, and it worked out well to enjoy an international option, but not have a full semester. I could not do that. I did do a variety of things in my program. I consulted and lectured to students because I was with an education placement. I also had lectures with parents and, of course, with faculty. And I enjoyed a lot of collegial discussions, and we generated ideas for future partnerships, and really just had a nice time interacting and getting to know each other. As far as professional and personal outcomes, I feel like throughout the process, we, both sides, built rapport and relationships. While I didn't do any research on my Fulbright later, some research came out of the process with one of my new colleagues that I met. I also had opportunities to empower students, and just in general, one of the beauties of it is the fact that you can offer goodwill to others. Motivation for participating, I think I've sort of mentioned that already, but I really, truly, as a lifelong educator, I saw this as a way to touch lives as an educator through this very important U.S. program. I also was somewhat recruited by peers who had had wonderful times on Fulbright opportunities, and they said, hey, it was wonderful, and they encouraged me to apply. So that was another motivation. I had peers with such good opportunities that I couldn't see any reason not to apply. And the concept of spreading goodwill, as I mentioned earlier, was, as a cultural ambassador from the US, was deeply meaningful to me. I have put some photographs throughout. That's the school. When I arrived in the car, they had my name. It said, "Welcome, Joy Burnham." And I'm not sure what else it said, but there you go. Beautiful school. The students were out front. You can see them in the distance. And so it's just a beautiful opportunity. Activities. One activity you can see in the photograph takes some Alabama information and t-shirts and fun things. So we had a nice rapport with the opportunities to interact and to have gifts and things. But on the academic side, what did I do? I consulted with educational psychology department. I offered ideas on tenure and promotion in the US. They were very interested in how we work through our T&P process. I helped them a bit with program evaluation. And because I have a counseling background, they were uniquely interested in looking at the school counseling program and program development. So I did have a variety of topics, lectures, opportunities, interactions over time. And I thoroughly enjoyed my days on the campus with the colleagues. I traveled a little bit on the weekends, and a lot of times I had the opportunity to eat my dinners with students, and I found that very fun and exciting. And they had lots of adventures with food and places that they took me. And the other thing that was prevalent, I also had the opportunity to visit 2 elementary schools in my time in China. So I think the final slide for me is supposed to look at the professional and the personal outcomes of this. Lots of things that I could put. I only had a slide with a few, and what I did is I am promoting the ideas, the opportunities that led to international outcomes at UA after I returned. For example, my Fulbright was in 2012. By 2015, I received a new appointment as the director of the Office of International Programs in my college. So I think that was a definite outcome of Fulbright and being seen as somebody that had strong, deep interests in international work. In my international office, I got to go back to China in 2016 and 2017. And I think I did something that I believe Fulbright would be proud of. I revisited my site, and we cultivated new partner ideas and collaborations at that point. And I also secured with my dean some partnerships, not only in Shenyang, but also in Beijing, Shanghai, and Nanjing. I also get to be one of the spokespersons for Fulbright in my college, and I try to always honor that and think that's a neat thing because I want others to go. And we've had several ones in more recent years. So I also co-directed a study abroad program, and again traveled, took students on that, and again another international framework. And next week I'm presenting a grant, submitting a grant. So I think that overall says a little bit about the opportunities and the honor it was for me to be a Fulbright specialist. It was one of the best decisions I made for my career. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Burnham. It's so cool to see how even 10 years down the road, you're still in contact and, finding opportunities to continue that collaboration and how it's impacted your work at University of Alabama. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to our next program alumni, who is Dr. Pamela Payne Foster, and she's going to be talking about her experience in Morocco. Go right ahead, Dr. Foster.
Yes, thank you very much. Glad to be here. Actually, my host institution was Kayai Ayad School of Health Sciences in Marrakesh, Morocco. Like Dr. Burnham, I did a 30-day assignment, mainly because my college was very hesitant to let me go for longer. It was nobody from our college had ever done a Fulbright specialist. So this was a new experience even for me. They didn't quite understand it. So I think it was good exposure for my college as well. Remember, even though we were on the University of Alabama campus, we are a part of UAB School of Medicine. So we're like a branch campus. So in some ways a little separated from the university main campus, but for me, it was great. So that was the main reason for choosing the specialist. I certainly was recruited heavily by Beverly Hawk, who is a great ambassador for the program. So that's helped a lot. And so what I'll do is just talk a little bit about what I did and my professional outcomes. So this is a picture of me in the shopping, shopping all over the world. How about that? As I stated before, she informed me of the opportunity, kept me updated on deadlines, and assisted me with my application. Otherwise, it probably wouldn't happen. So I just want to talk about the support that the office gives, which is great. I had planned a series of lectures. I am a preventive medicine public health physician. I do a lot of work in community engagement. And so that was what I thought I would be doing. I had planned a series of talks. I was working with the community medicine department there at the Health Sciences Center. 3 talks, CBPR, community-based participatory research, service learning for students, which we know is big at UA and certainly in medicine, and just medical education in general. However, when I sat down with them, they had other interests, and one of them was about medical ethics and an IRB. So that first picture you saw was actually a picture of the hospital. So I actually went to the hospital to give a lecture there on the importance of medical ethics. I talked about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, which they all knew about. So it is a worldwide issue. And so that was added in there. And they were really interested in service learning as well as the community-based participatory work. So I left a lecture to the department. When I lectured to the hospital about medical ethics, it was a larger audience from across the campus, but I did some individual consulting as well. Next slide. My husband and his goddaughter came over and visited me. So that was one of the pictures of us just kind of touring. But I'll tell you, the biggest thing for me was learning flexibility and really just kind of adjusting to what other people needed, particularly my partners there. They kept trying to get me to come earlier, and my niece was graduating from college, so I really wanted to be there. So I kept pushing back on the date of the month, and it actually went into Ramadan, which I had no idea I was getting into as a Christian. It really, everything shuts down because there's no eating until later on. So that turned out to be a great learning experience for me about other religions, and really helped me to gain an empathy for many. We have many Muslims, non-Christians in our residency program to really connect and understand what they go through. The other thing I really connected with, as you know, Marrakesh is not an English speaking as a first language. Most of the professors spoke English, and when I gave my lectures, I had to speak slowly so they could really understand me. But I really gained empathy for those from other countries who don't have English as their first language. So I thought that was important as well. So those are the things I've gained. I have not connected. I wish I could say I had connected and have kept the relationships going. One of the professors from there came to the US to do a Fulbright, and he was up in Pennsylvania, dropped through Alabama, but so we kind of missed each other, and he wanted to do some connecting there. But the personal and professional, I think, helps me as a professor in medicine, just and trying to convey that to my students and other learners about the flexibility to adjust to sudden changes. It was great to have my husband and a family friend join me in the assignment, and it has definitely enlarged. I do a lot of work in cultural competency, so it has definitely enlarged my cultural knowledge, particularly to gain skills that are important in medicine and healthcare, that empathy, flexibility, and patience. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Foster. I think you make a really great point about how the opportunity is not just, for you to, you're kind of shown as the expert, or,
Right.
You're the consultant, and you're going to
Right.
be sharing your knowledge with the institution, but it's really such a great learning experience for
Right.
the specialists themselves. And
I do have to tell one funny story.
Yeah.
I went in 2016. I think it was June 2016. That was at the height of the political campaign, American political campaign. Everyone asked me, every other person asked me about Trump. Trump. What about Trump? What about Trump? What about Trump? And I kept saying, oh, Trump. Don't worry about Trump. He's not going to be president. Ha, ha, ha. So I have to tell that funny story. So the international politics was, they say you're not supposed to talk about politics, but that was on everybody's mind during that time. There was a lot going on in Europe, in Britain, a lot of politics going on. So we had great discussions around those.
Yes, I think it's definitely an interesting experience as a Fulbrighter. You're kind of viewed as a representative of Americans and what Americans think about things. So that adds certainly a really interesting dimension to the experience of a Fulbright. So we have one last slide here, or set of slides here from Dr. Norma Cuellar. Unfortunately, she couldn't actually be here in person. She is currently traveling to Puerto Rico, but she passed along some information about her project that I wanted to share quickly before we dive into questions. So she did a little bit of a longer project in Peru. It was 6 weeks long, so that's the maximum length for these exchanges. And her focus was on advancing nursing knowledge and improving healthcare outcomes for people in Peru. So she primarily participated in a lot of different seminars with different Peruvian nurses, but also helped consult with them on some research that they were trying to conceptualize on Peruvians living with chronic health conditions, and how to giving some of her insights from her work here in the US on how to begin conceptualizing and implementing research for older adults. So that's a good example of how, even though this program does not necessarily support individual specialists to go overseas and conduct their own research, there might still be elements of research capacity building that host institutions are interested in, that you can use your experiences to help lend your expertise, whether that's on developing publications, being competitive for grants, conceptualizing and implementing research. There are still a lot of opportunities there within that topic. So she gave a number of presentations in the host institution herself. And then while she was there, she actually had the opportunity to, during her collaborations, actually get started on some of the work that they've continued even after she's come back from to the US. So as you can see here, she's been very productive with her host institution, writing and submitting abstracts, collaborating with them on research proposals, and on research manuscripts that she was able to follow up on during her sabbatical. And she also had the opportunity to serve as kind of a representative of the University of Alabama and promote UVA's work in this field of healthcare and diversity, and kind of serve as that representative for students to expose them to University of Alabama and all the wonderful programs that you have at this institution. In terms of the professional outcomes of her exchange, this opportunity, the relationships that she created and solidified during her exchange have enabled her to that kind of research conceptualization that I was talking about earlier, to actually work with the institution to implement that research through the Fulbright Scholar Program. So she's conducted numerous seminars on the research process and implementation of evidence-based research in Peru, and is very active in follow-up research collaborations with her host institution in terms of different research projects and studies, particularly around older adults and those that are living with chronic health conditions like tuberculosis. Now, I think these pictures kind of speak for themselves, but if there's anything I can leave you with from Dr. Cuellar's exchange experience, is that the specialist program has been really instrumental in helping her develop relationships with her colleagues in another country that are really lifelong collaborations. So as you can see here, these exchanges, while short, are not just about go overseas and conduct a bunch of lectures and then come home. You're really interacting with your colleagues overseas. You have opportunities to, as you can see here, visit tourist sites, participate in daily life, and just get to know your host city and host community. So this has still got that element of cultural exchange, just in that shorter impactful time frame of 2 to 6 weeks. So with that, I'm gonna kind of open things up to questions. I know some people have to go, so we are wrapping up the kind of formal presentation part of this event today. But before we open things up to questions, I just want to leave my email here. This Fulbright Specialist at worldlearning.org email is administered by myself, so you'll be hearing from me or my colleague Emma. And also leave you with the link to the Capstone International Center's page about Fulbright Awards. So they've got a great page on their website that covers both the specialist program and the scholar program, some of those differences and considerations. And with that, I'm going to kind of wrap things up. And I would say if you have questions, pop them into the chat box. If you have questions for our alumni, just make sure that you make sure to let us know who that question is for. But thanks as well to our alumni for contributing their perspectives and experiences today. All right, and just keeping an eye out here. Well, I think we have a pretty small group, so I'm going to retract what I said earlier. If you have a question, just feel free to unmute yourself, and we can take it from there.
Amira, I did want to add that I did meet when I was there some other Fulbright undergrad and graduate students.
Oh, great.
Particularly those who were interested, those in public health. And I also met with the regional director around public health because I think they were really trying to develop more public health projects in that area. So I think there's opportunity around even expanding from the site where I was located.
Wonderful. And was that at the Fulbright Commission?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's another thing to know kind of as a Fulbright grant recipient is, you know, in addition to the contact that you have with World Learning staff, there's also either a Fulbright Commission, in Dr. Foster's case, the Fulbright Commission in Morocco, or a U.S. embassy that is also overseeing the program in
seems like that office was in Rabat. So I took the train up. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So there will be kind of other folks there supporting you during your grant experience who will be there as a resource if you have questions, or sometimes they might have you have a meeting with them.
Yeah, I met with a student who was going to med school. I mean, it was interesting. They were all taking Arabic because that's the other language in Morocco. So just some great experiences interacting with those students as well.
That's great. I think it's wonderful when different Fulbrighters are able to get together. All right, well, I don't think that we have any, it doesn't look like we have any questions from the group today.
I have one quick question.
Oh, okay, yep.
Yeah, thanks. This was very, very interesting. So there's about 400 folks placed per year. About how many projects are proposed by institutions each year? It's
a really great question. Unfortunately, I do not have great data on this because the way that institutions, or excuse me, commissions and embassies administer the project review process really varies. Some commissions and embassies only submit information to us about projects that they're approving, whereas other commissions and embassies submit information about how many proposals they've actually received and how many they've approved. So unfortunately, I really don't have a good answer for you on that front. What I will say on that topic is, I would say this is probably pretty similar to other Fulbright program offerings, but there are certainly regions and where the program is perhaps undersubscribed or less subscribed than in some of the more popular regions like Europe, where there's a lot of Fulbright commissions and a lot of understanding about Fulbright and all the different opportunities that are available. A lot of institutions know about the Fulbright Specialist Program and submit proposals, whereas there are regions like Sub-Saharan Africa, the MENA region, where you know, commissions and embassies may be reviewing overall fewer proposals.
And I would answer to that, Andrew. I, of course, had Sub-Saharan Africa as my first choice in the Caribbean as a second, but because I got Marrakesh because of the connections. Bev had done a Fulbright there. So it is all about connections. And I think the more we can develop connections and get 1 or 2 Fulbrights in there, then it'll sort of open up.
Yeah, I think there is some opportunity here in terms of individuals who are on the roster. You know, we do not prohibit individuals on the roster from doing outreach around the Fulbright Specialist Program. You know, we don't, for example, if you know there is an institution in another country that could benefit from your particular skill set or the skill set of another colleague who's on the roster, it's not, we don't forbid you to reach out to them and let them know that the program exists and inquire if they might be interested in submitting a proposal. That's perfectly fine. So there is that opportunity there as well, in addition to reviewing that kind of ongoing list of available projects that becomes shared with anybody who's admitted to the roster.
And I can't remember, I know Angela Benson in education did work in Zambia. I'm not sure if she did the specialist. Did she, Amira, do you know?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, but she
I think it might have been longer. But what
group.
happened was they liked her so much, she stayed even longer. I think she stayed beyond a year there. So, and those relationships are really important. Joy, you might know.
Yes, I was
Yes.
going to say that she spent over a year there. I believe she might have started off with a specialist, but she wound
Gotcha.
up taking the long.
Yeah, yeah, because she had talked to me about the specialist. So,
Mhm.
and so, but that's a great opportunity once you develop those strong relationships for others. that
Absolutely.
come behind you. Yeah.
Oh, very informative. Thank you. Thank you.
Could you say a little more about the choosing the fields? So my work falls in the middle of, say, 2 different ones. And do you just have to choose one and go with it? Or if you don't see any, then you go to a different one?
Yeah, so there's kind of two things to know about this process. So yes, if you are in sort of a more interdisciplinary field, or you kind of consider yourself between 2 disciplines, ultimately when you apply, you will be asked to select just one. And that is going to influence the general background of the peer reviewers that will be reviewing your application. So I find that piece of information that, you know, it's going to impact the peer reviewers is helpful for people when they're kind of deciding which option is better for them to choose. It's, you know, maybe kind of a case of look at your respective, you know, publications, your academic studies, what your current work is in, and whichever discipline aligns more closely with that would probably be the best choice. But once you are admitted to the roster, you are able to see and express your interest in projects in all disciplines. So it doesn't constrain you to being considered for a specific handful of, you know, a specific group of projects in a particular discipline.
So the discipline's more about the peer review process.
Exactly.
Right, thank you. And what are it sounds like often, as Pam was saying, that these things are often set up by connections with previous people who were at the institutions. Do people who are just on the roster, if they don't sort of go and make those connections, does that happen very much? Or do you need to get on the roster and not spend too much time just sitting there if you're not actually being proactive in finding institutions who might need your expertise?
It's a great question. So ultimately, you know, if you're admitted to the roster, you'll be on the roster for 3 years, which is a pretty long time, right? So it's really up to the individual how they want to proceed. Some people apply and they say, you know, I'm just kind of interested in being on the roster and seeing what becomes available. I'm not too concerned about definitely getting a project or not. And they stay on the roster the whole time, and they just kind of check out the list of available projects periodically. There are others who are more proactive about not only checking and reviewing the roster periodically, but also doing kind of their own self-advocacy and outreach around a named project proposal. And we permit both of those. What I would say is, regardless of the avenues in which you choose to be proactive about matching, there is some element needed of self-determination from the specialist candidate. And what I mean by that is, the number one way to 99% make sure that you will not get matched to a project is to go through all of the effort of applying to the program and getting on the roster, and then just like never do anything about it ever again. While we conduct our own outreach to people on the roster, for example, we'll reach out and send an email to everybody once a month and say, here's the projects that are available. And we're also reviewing individual projects and reaching out to people individually to say, have you seen this project? It seems like it could be a good fit for you. If you don't ultimately submit yourself for consideration for a project, we'll take that as you don't have an interest in being considered for that project. Does that make sense?
Well, thank you. Thanks very much.
All right, it looks like we have a couple minutes left. Does anybody have any other questions that I or Dr. Burnham or Dr. Foster can help answer?
So Doctors Burnham and Foster, I may well reach out to you.
Sounds good.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
It won't be the first time.
resident Fulbright Specialist experts. And I think alumni are a great resource. And I actually want to mention, obviously, Dr. Burnham and Dr. Foster are here and have had some really wonderful insights and recommendations. But there is a full list of Fulbright Specialist alumni that's up on our website. So if you do want to see who else at University of Alabama has done this, where'd they go, what institution, all of that stuff, what discipline, that's all available on our program website. So you can check that out. And that goes back to 2001. All right, everyone. It looks like it's kind of coming to a natural end. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. Just a reminder that, I don't know if Mary has more to say about this, but it is just the start of the International Education Week activities at University of Alabama. I know they have a whole host of events coming up. So that link is up in the chat at the very top. But with that, I'll close everything out, and just to thank you again to Dr. Burnham and Dr. Foster for making the time today to speak with everyone and share their experiences. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today to learn more about the Fulbright Specialist Program.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.